We all know Max True. He's a high-rep calisthenics engineer with multiple world records and a lean aesthetic physique. But if you watch his workouts closely, something feels different. His training isn't really complicated, and yet somehow his endurance, strength, and control always seem to be improving. So the real question is, what exactly is he doing differently? The confusing part. When most people train calisthenics, the goal is usually to perform a difficult set, rest, and repeat it a few times. The harder the set feels, the more productive the workout seems. But when you watch Max True's training closely, the structure often looks different. Instead of stopping once the hardest part is over, he frequently continues the exercise by slightly changing the difficulty. For example, a workout might start with a harder variation of a movement, something that requires more strength or additional resistance. After that set is finished, instead of ending the exercise entirely, he continues with the same movement using body weight only. And sometimes the set even continues with a simplified version that allows the movement to go on a little longer. Now at first, it looks like he's simply trying to squeeze out as many repetitions as possible. But when you look closer, this method is actually very structured. But this is where things start to get interesting, because that small change in structure creates something extremely powerful. Volume that builds skill. One of the biggest advantages of this style of training is how much practice it creates. Most calisthenics exercises are not just about strength, they are also coordination skills. Movements like dips, push-ups, rows, and pull-ups require the body to coordinate multiple muscle groups while stabilizing your entire body weight. The more often that movement is repeated, the more efficient the nervous system becomes at performing it. And this is exactly what extended sets allow. Instead of performing a movement for a few repetitions and stopping, the exercise continues through multiple variations. Over time, this repeated exposure improves control, coordination, and efficiency. The body becomes better at recruiting the correct muscles, stabilizing the joints, and maintaining proper technique throughout the entire range of motion. But repetition alone isn't the only benefit of this approach. Over time, that extra volume starts doing something else. And here's the part that doesn't make sense. If this method increases volume this much, shouldn't it actually make you weaker over time? You'd expect that, right? But it actually does the opposite. Because when the same movement continues through multiple variations, the total number of repetitions increases significantly. That extra workload accumulates quickly, creating a powerful stimulus for both muscular endurance and strength. But if this method increases the amount of work so much, there's an obvious question. Wouldn't that destroy your recovery? Recovery advantage. Interestingly, this style of training can also make workouts more sustainable. Extremely high-intensity training can be effective, but if you add high volume and frequency, it can create a large amount of fatigue. But when the workload is spread across multiple variations of the same movement, the fatigue builds more gradually. The hardest effort still happens at the beginning of the set when the movement is most difficult. But as fatigue increases, the variation becomes slightly easier instead of stopping completely. This allows the athlete to continue performing quality repetitions without forcing the body to operate at maximum intensity the entire time. So the answer is no, this doesn't destroy recovery. In fact, it often does the opposite. Because instead of pushing every set to complete failure, the difficulty gradually decreases, allowing you to continue the movement without constantly forcing maximal effort. Over time, that balance between effort and fatigue can make it much easier to stay consistent with training. Of course, this isn't the only thing behind Max True's training, but this principle alone explains a huge part of why his workouts seem to work so well. However, there's one mistake people often make when they try to copy this style of training. The common mistake. One thing that's important to understand, though, is that this method only works if it's done correctly. Just because the sets are extended through easier variations doesn't mean every single round should be pushed to complete failure. If you constantly train to absolute failure every workout, fatigue accumulates much faster and recovery quickly becomes a problem. The goal of this style of training isn't to destroy yourself in one session, but to accumulate a large amount of quality work while still being able to come back and train again consistently. When the intensity is managed properly, the body adapts far better over time, which is exactly why this approach can be so effective for building both strength and endurance. And once you understand that, the real takeaway from this style of training becomes pretty obvious. Takeaway. So when people look at Max True's training and wonder why it seems so effective, the answer probably isn't a secret exercise or complicated routine. Instead, the method revolves around something surprisingly simple: extending the same movement through multiple levels of difficulty, starting with the hardest variation, continuing with the standard version, and finishing with a simplified variation once fatigue appears. The movement itself never changes, but the total amount of work increases dramatically. Over time, those extra repetitions accumulate, building strength, improving coordination, and developing the kind of endurance that calisthenics athletes are known for. And when that process is repeated consistently week after week, it becomes much easier to understand how someone like Max True develops such impressive performance across so many bodyweight exercises. But there's another interesting effect of this style of training that most people overlook. It doesn't just build endurance, it can also keep you surprisingly lean. And if you want to understand why that happens, watch the video on screen.